Hello, friends. It is so great to connect with all of you. I wanted to do a little bit of an intro to this episode. I was lucky enough to have one of my dear friends, Ryan Tower, join me, and we had an excellent conversation about a lot of meaningful and relevant topics. And we are hoping to collaborate more in the future. So keep that on your radar. Ryan also has his own podcast, and we will introduce him and the projects that he's doing as well. I wanted to come on for a moment just to kind of preface this channel, this show, why it's being created, the heart behind it, and also share a little bit about the resistance that we're experiencing even trying to get this one episode released. So just to clarify, the reason why this is such a important project to my heart, as well as I know that it is to Ryan as well. It's not about how many people we can reach. It's not about clout. It's not about any type of advertising. It really is about sharing truth and being a voice to speak on behalf of the truth during this time in history. And I share a little bit about my experience, and Ryan does as well, that both of us were greatly impacted by other people in the online space sharing their testimony, sharing some things that was really relevant to where we both have found ourselves in the not too distant past. So if there is ever an opportunity for somebody, maybe they're going through a hard time, I know that my heart was transformed by listening to other people and their testimony during very dark, low times in my life. So if we can help to shine light in the darkness, if we can help to be the light on the mountain, if we can help to be the salt of the earth, then that is what we're called to do. So that is really the heart and the intention of these episodes. With that being said, this is also not created because there is an overabundance of extra time in my life and any of the guests that I bring on. It's really a service to others and a service to what we believe is the ultimate truth. And, it's not necessarily easy, and there is a level of resistance that comes up when you are committing to walking a very narrow path. So, whenever I was in church during the liturgy this last weekend, Father Gregory made an excellent point stating that the devil doesn't hang out in bars, and that's because he doesn't have to. And so when we are committed to the narrow path, when we're committed to not left or right, but truth and being challenged and being held up and supported by the gospel, by tradition, by deep, meaningful practices, theology, spiritual rootedness, that's when things do actually get challenging in our life. So I can say that it was last weekend that we went to record this episode, and everything that could go wrong did go wrong. I mean, from the weather to the microphones to the cameras, right once we hit record. And we do have to end this episode very abruptly because Ryan, bless his heart, fell ill instantly. So while we were recording, which I know is not his intention, he is, not somebody that definitely gets taken down easily. But I do believe that was just one more thing that we are experiencing with whatever resistance you want to call that. We try not to be superstitious, and we try not to give a lot of clout to maybe adversaries or any will of the accuser. So I'm not going to do that, but what I am going to say is that it's been a challenge. And so I want you guys to know that we're going to do more of this, even if we have to push really hard to do it. We're not going to give up. It might take us a while for us to have the time and the resources to be able to put all of the pieces together. I know that Ryan's been doing his podcast for years and he has overcome so many different things from being shadow banned to just, stuff in his life. Same thing with me. I've had so much stuff come up that, yeah, it's been a challenge. But so hopefully this can help somebody. Hopefully it will reach somebody. I pray that this can reach somebody. That is why, that's why that I'm doing this. I know that that's why anybody that comes on the show is going to really have a connection with the purpose and the meaning of why we're doing this. So if it resonates with you, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the episode, share it, comment. We would love to stay connected, have conversations. I will also let you know that Ryan is way more involved and educated in a lot of things that I'm not. So some of the things aren't even really about like agreeing on certain things. I would say that my space is maybe that I'm just not as well informed or educated on some things. So he's entitled to his own opinions. I do trust his opinions very much. And I think we're going to get into some pretty deep topics going into the future. So this is kind of like part one of an intro series. So keep that in mind for sure. Yeah, and I apologize if it's a little hard to listen to this video. I know doing some editing, I realize that whenever I'm feeling tired or, I just maybe have a lot going on, that I use a lot of filler words. So I'm going to try to be aware of that so you have more of a better viewing experience. But this one's going to end abruptly. Catch us for the next one. God bless you all. I hope that you are blessed. I hope you are helped in many ways and that you are protected. And yeah, thank you for sharing this space with us. And we'll see you on the other side. Okay. All right. So welcome to the Rooted Revival. I have a friend joining me here today. So I met Mr. Ryan Tower a few years ago, I think in 2019, when he lived in Southwest Colorado. And we became friends over talking about our podcasts, probably some good hip hop that we both enjoy and good music and things like that. Mm-hmm. So Ryan is one of the smartest people that I know. So of course I would want him on the channel to talk about some things. Ryan has his own podcast that is called Living in the Logos.
Living in the Logos, yeah.
Living in the Logos. Mm-hmm. Ryan is very well versed in theology, as a master's in theology. He is also a researcher and one of the fellow friends that I have met that is also on the path in Orthodoxy. So I really appreciate that. We kind of came together and started talking about how we could collaborate on some important topics. So when we have Ryan on, it's going to be a little bit different than the other episodes because I really trust his worldview, especially on things that are happening currently. And so just to preface that, we might get into some things that might be either like heavier or things that definitely are open up for discussion. I know that Ryan's always willing to have conversations, so I will refer to him for a lot of things just because he's way more knowledgeable than I am. But to get this thing kicked off, I wanted to do a reading from this book I've been reading called Unseen Warfare. And this is, it was edited by Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain, and it was revised in the 18th century.
Yeah, I think the original was actually it's actually a Western Catholic who wrote the original book. And then it was adapted, I think, by that Greek fellow. I've heard a lot about that. I've heard a lot about the book, but I haven't read it yet. So I'm curious to see what you're going to read from there.
Yeah, it's the my priest was like, "Really? You're starting with that?" So this is probably not one to start with, but I
Yeah.
appreciate it because it's really kind of strict wording and it helps me in my path because I
Hmm.
like need that discipline. But it does kind of preface maybe some of the things that we are going to get into. So this chapter is the exercise of the mind, and this is on how we should exercise our mind lest it be sick with the disease of ignorance. So a
Hmm.
lot of what we're doing these episodes is to illuminate some of the things that are happening right now in the world so that we don't have to be ignorant to what's happening.
Hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit about this. Couple excerpts from it. For it is this examination and deepening of the knowledge is right and proper. It will quite certainly enable us to understand clearly that we must with all our hearts regard as valueless, vain, and false all that the blind and depraved world loves and seeks. To forgive our enemies and to do good to them is truly magnanimity, one of the greatest traits of likeness to God, that a man who scorns the world shows greater strength and power than a man who rules over the whole world. That willing obedience is an action which shows more courage and strength of spirit than subjugating great kings and ruling over them. That humble self-knowledge should be prepared to all other kinds of knowledge. So I just wanted to kind of intro with that, so we know where we're at, that we're like setting this stage so that we're like responsible and we're not like fear mongering, but like really trying to um, expand the kingdom of heaven here on earth. And a lot of that is understanding like what's happening, why it's happening, and having that historical, uh, philosophical, theological view of world events. So
Hmm.
yes. So Ryan, I would love you to introduce more about yourself, and then we'll kind of get going on some of the questions that we're going to talk about.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I really appreciate all your kind words. I spent most of my young adult and adult life just kind of being infatuated with the world in many different ways. So that, to make a long story short, I kind of progressed from a new age, I would consider it more like a syncretic kind of perennialist worldview, which basically is just means that we believe as a perennialist, or we would believe as a perennialist, that there's a bit of truth in every kind of worldview, so that they're all describing the same thing, or as people use the phrase a lot, there's all different ways to get to the top of the mountain, but you still get to the same mountaintop sort of thing. And so I held that belief for a long time, and I investigated it in many different ways, and that led me into theology eventually. But for many years prior to becoming a Christian, I was mostly interested in philosophy proper, not so much theology. And what I came to discover was that when you dive deep enough into philosophy, when you continue with the why question as far as you can go, you recognize that the worldviews which are willing to reject the necessity of a God are not capable of making sense of the world. And so that's kind of that whole idea, this idea that philosophically you can't make sense of the world without presupposing a personal God, is at the core of how I see everything. And then the channel really, which I'll be posting a lot more to in the coming months, is meant to be a way of exploring the world through that framework. So through an Orthodox Christian perspective, my goal is to try and help people as well as myself make sense of what's happening in the world. So that's basically the gist, and it's slightly vague on purpose because I get interested in a lot of different things that don't necessarily fit into a neat category. So living in the Logos is a reference to this idea that the world is made by a logical, personal, loving creator, and in the New Testament, that's referred to as the Logos. So yeah, that's kind of the kernel, the seed of the channel, and that's what we're going to continue looking at as we go on. So I appreciate you having me on, and I think that probably the most exciting thing about the internet is that things like this are possible, that we live in a time where these conversations can happen, that they can happen easily, and that, plenty of people can see it. And I'm very grateful. So I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your interest in the world and your commitment to trying to investigate things and figure out how things work. And not only that, but your compassion, and that you would like other people to know what you know. And I'm a big believer in the ideology that you have to learn things to teach them. So I think when people are serious about learning, they end up teaching the things that they learn, because you realize really quickly that that's the best way to learn. So yes, I appreciate you having me on. I really support the idea of the show, and I'm looking forward to digging into some things, and hopefully we can learn some things together.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, Ryan, because I haven't asked you this before. You started this podcast years ago, before I even met you.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
at that point in time, I also had a podcast. My podcast was called The Noble Cause.
Hmm.
And I was very much like, it's crazy the similarities in our lives and in like our belief systems as well. So I was
Hmm.
also in that like new age world mind view, worldview, mind worldview.
Hmm. Yeah, I knew what you mean.
Um, and so when I was doing those episodes, it's not that I am going to say like throw all of them out and say they were all bad, because now I have like
Hmm.
definitely recommitted my life as a Christian. But I've always believed like what you said, that like God was pulling me the whole time. Like if I ended up here, then like he was still with me there.
Yeah.
But then I struggled with this channel whenever I wanted to redo it. I originally was going to keep my name of my old channel because I thought, well, it's still Noble Cause. It kind of goes in perfectly with like
Yeah. Yeah.
being strung along through with God. But then I decided that I wanted to like change the name of it to be more like um just kind of like in your face, I guess, with the rooted revival, you know. I feel like
Hmm.
Noble Cause can be very ethereal and it can go anywhere. But
Sure.
did you have that thought process whenever you were kind of picking up again and starting like with your different belief system?
Yeah, so I've had quite a few times to start over. I just had to do that recently because so one thing that you'll learn, I mean, maybe nowadays it's maybe less important because things have opened up a lot as far as the discourse is concerned online. And so going back 5 years though, what's possible to talk about in public discourse today was not possible back then. And as far
Mm.
as the algorithm goes, the companies, the Silicon Valley companies that are creating our digital environment for us, and then obviously monitoring it and making sure that it's perpetuated in a way that benefits them and the people that support their cause. And so I've had to basically like nuke whole YouTube channels because I talked about something that shouldn't have been talked about, and then it
Oh,
got
wow.
reported. And what you realize is that if you're posting content about some idea or some ideology or something, once the content gets flagged, if it's flagged as something like hateful or something, racist or bigoted, it's very, very difficult to climb out of that algorithmic hole, so to speak. And recently, I mean, things have opened up quite a bit, so it's not so much the case now, which I'm thankful for. Um, as far as going from kind of the non-Christian to the Christian worldview, I think that for for at least a decade before I became Christian, I was convinced that there was a God in some sense, and so I didn't really have one of the unique things about Eastern Christianity is the vocabulary that it gives to when you're trying to talk about things like the passions you mentioned earlier, and also the different ways in which they're able to give us language that talks about the internal experience in our mind as well as unique. But I didn't really have any of that language back then, so I was kind of trying to make sense of the world without a whole picture. Um, but yeah, it fit in, I think. If I go back and I look at the things that I was creating 10 years ago to now, I can see there's a logical flow of thinking, you know what I mean? It wasn't a huge break. I think the main thing is, like I mentioned earlier, is the personal aspect of God and the fact that, in obviously in the Christian conception of things, we believe that God is has personal qualities and is actually a person. So that's a unique thing. But I definitely have had to be conscious of the things that I import into my new way of seeing the world. And so I think a lot of, especially if you're an inquisitive person or you're, a seeker in some sense, which I think a lot of the people who end up in the Orthodox faith tend to be inquisitive people who really actually seek after truth and knowledge. And not that other people don't, but I just found in my experience that the people I run into, especially from our generation, they're very much the seeking type. But yeah, I think that there's something unique to that and important to it that I look forward to exploring more. I think that I kind of lost track of what I was saying. Oh yeah, it's a unique thing that Orthodoxy offers us, and I think that without it, it's very difficult to understand what's happening in the world. That's kind of what I was trying to get to.
Yeah. No, that's great. And actually, so it's interesting. I had like a little bit of an outline of some of the things we could talk about.
Hmm.
And um I thought that we would get into more like political government stuff, but
Hmm.
honestly, I think it would be wise if you could share what brought you to Orthodoxy, especially from that other worldview. And then that can be like the foundation, moving forward. So like there's just like clarity on that.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, at the most basic level, what made me a Christian is that I was really at like a rock bottom level of depression. I was incredibly nihilistic. I was just really toxic to be around. I was drinking a lot. I was using drugs a lot. And it got to a point where I was suicidal. I was pretty much ready to die and I didn't care about anything. And I really, really felt that way. It wasn't like a performative type of depression, like a seeking for attention or anything. Like I was genuinely at my wit's end. And I had basically made the decision to commit suicide. And not long after that, I prayed for the first time. And after I prayed for the first time, I happened onto a YouTube video that was a sermon by this pastor from Kentucky. And he actually was talking about the central banking system and, some conspiracy theories that I had already explored. So that was attractive to me at the time. And it was really his material that brought me into Christianity and away from the New Age thing. And really the realization was very simple. It was that I recognize that the people who are building the infrastructure to rule over us tyrannically in the future, these billionaires and transhumanists and technocrats that we'll be talking about today, all of those people have basically a new age worldview. And I recognize that this system that's being built that smart, I think people are trying to resist and in some sense overcome. I think if you recognize that your worldview is very much in line with their worldview, it was enough to give me pause and start to wonder, why do I believe these kind of perennialist ideas and syncretic ideas and stuff? So I started to investigate it more deeply, and that was really the main reason, is that I felt like the New Age worldview is actually aligned with evil. And so I started looking into it. And then as far as specifically Orthodoxy, um, I think that the historical arguments I think are the most persuasive if you're not somebody that's thinking in terms of philosophy, and that was really, my kind of line of thinking went from not Christian to I found a Baptist church here in the city where I live, and I went there for almost a year. And quickly, as I started to learn about theology, then I was in school and I was really actually investigating these questions deeper, kind of about who Christ was, the history of the church and stuff. And I realized really quickly that the independent, fundamental Baptist, King James only was a very limited portion of Christianity, and so I started investigating that stuff further. And eventually I ended up in a Presbyterian church, which is a reformed, I would consider it a very light Calvinist kind of reformed church, but a little more high church oriented and a lot more intellectual, a lot more intelligent approach to scripture and things. And for about a year, I grew there for a while. But what ended up happening is I was really moved by the idea that we still find churches in, in the Middle East that are the same as they were when Paul was around. And it was very logical for me from there to go, okay, so what should Christianity look like now? And if it doesn't look like the Christianity that Paul experienced, and if the churches don't look the same, there should be a really, really, really good reason. And the only really good reason that you can come up with is that the apostles were wrong. And I don't believe that, and I don't think anyone should. And so, and that, there's a lot of other ideas that flow from that idea, but fundamentally it was a recognition that there is a pure form of Christianity that remained unchanged from the time of Christ all the way until now. And that, in my opinion, is Orthodox Christianity. So it was the historical arguments first and foremost, but then once I started, kind of investing myself in the ideas of Orthodoxy, what I recognized is a very intelligent ability of being able to reconcile a lot of the dualities that we have in our approach to philosophy and theology. And so there's a lot of different ways you can think about that, but generally speaking, this overall idea that it's possible to reconcile these extremes so that you get more of a both and instead of an either or. And in almost in every aspect of theology and philosophy, Eastern Orthodoxy says both and rather than either or. And that was really appealing to me because I thought not only that it was true, that it reflected what I was reading in scripture, but it creates a situation where you can have a much more, I think, thorough expression of Christianity, something that touches the whole person rather than maybe just believing the correct thing in your mind or, just being at church on Sunday. It touches every aspect of your life. And that was really important to me as well. So those are kind of the main things, but there's so many different reasons. There's a lot.
Yeah, I know it's so deep. It's something that I mean, even I share with some of my closest friends, and I feel like it's an injustice for me to even be talking about it sometimes because it's not something I
Mm.
can have a short conversation about. But
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah, all
funny
them.
because, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think all important things
Hmm.
generally require some level of nuance if you want to handle them in any way that respects, the quality of what they are, for sure.
Yeah, and that's
Hmm.
why like we're living in such a like reductionist society, and that's what's normal to people is not having to make space for any deeper thoughts or, any of that.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting. I didn't know about the YouTube channel, the YouTube video thing. That's exactly what happened to me is I found in the darkest time of my life, I just turned on YouTube and I heard a woman's testimony and she
Yeah.
was coming out of the new age and it just
Hmm.
clicked. The exact same thing happened to me. I just thought, wow, because I was even like claiming, like, oh, like Christian mysticism, Christian
Yeah.
Gnosticism, all
Hmm.
of this, like as if it was like, oh, it's Christian, but it's like we have like all these secrets, right? Like we know that the secret is that we can all become gods and that Jesus was
Yeah.
just an
Yeah.
example, right? And
Hmm.
so once I started to see how that was actually like you said, like aligned with the worldview of people that may not have your best interests, then I had
Hmm.
to question, I had to step back and I'd say, wait a minute, like what do I believe and why do I believe that? And
Yeah.
I was thankful that I was able to just like give it up right there and right then and just like to God and just be like, I need you to show me who you are, because I've
Hmm.
been having examples my whole life. And I think part of what was so appealing to me too with the Orthodoxy is like I grew up in a Christian household, but there was not that holistic approach, right? So, like, I had family members that struggled with mental health, struggled with physical health.
Yeah.
Like, there was no room for any nature or anything to do with like the earth and any of that. So, orthodoxy to me
Hmm.
is like such a holistic approach, like for our whole mind, body, spirit, for our planet, for our community, for our families, for everything,
Hmm.
even down to like the praying and fasting and all that. And it's tradition that like especially since I've like since lost my parents and my husband, and so I've like had so much loss, that like tradition that I can instill into my family and my family with my kids, and then them pass it down. Like if you could create something that can be passed down that is strong enough to withstand anything that happens, like that's what I want to do, because everything else is like so like fickle, like the people are just, it's so easy for things to fall apart right now, and it's like I want something
Yeah.
that's like really strong and heavily rooted. And some of the basic questions, like, I had this like conversation with a family member recently, like talking about hell and how it's explained like in the, Protestant Reformed churches. It's just like pretty much the answer you get is yes, it's a place where God punishes you for not doing what he says, and you're just going to have to deal with it. And it still means that he loves you. And it's like, if that's just like the pill you have to swallow without there being better answers and to actually come to understand intuitively, because intuitively that doesn't make sense. You can't tell me that somebody loves me and that they want to punish me at the same time. Those don't go together. And it's because it's much, much deeper than that, first of all. And then second of all, making room for the mystery. Never growing up did I ever hear anybody said, well, it is unclear from the scripture. The scripture, it is unclear. So making room for that
Yeah.
mystery, that's uncommon. It's usually like having an answer, but like a bad answer. So then people, like me, I'm just going to throw it out because it's like, well, I don't believe that, and I'm not going to believe that, and that I don't think that that should even be part of my faith. So I can relate with you on a lot of those things. And I think it's cool that we're doing this too, because one of the reasons why like I want to do this episode and like this podcast is because I was transformed by somebody else sharing their story online. And so I
Hmm.
feel like, it's just like planting these seeds, and maybe it will help, like, even if it's just a little bit, to get people to like wake up a little bit to like what
Yeah.
they really are giving agency in their life. Because I believe
Hmm.
that people, they're just not aware of it. It's not that people are bad and that they're like evil, but they are participating and they are giving their agency to things that are evil without knowing
Hmm.
about it. So it's like, let's blow the lid off of this sucker, It's like, let's
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about it, let's like get into it, and then you can make your own choice. It's what God has given you, the ability to make your own choice. So you're not
Yeah.
forced into do anything, but for people to not have the awareness and the information that they need to make a correct right-hearted decision, I think that that's the least we could do.
Yeah, absolutely. And the world, I mean, especially as it stands today, it's certainly not a simple task to try and make sense of what's going on. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of deception. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of intentional lying going on. There's a lot of people who are misled, trying to lead people. So
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely it's a quite the task. And I think that without the historical boundaries that we have set for us in the Orthodox conception of the world, you end up you inevitably end up on the wrong path. And there's a reason why the faith was established once for all time, with the saints specifically. But and that's an important thing. There's a reason why it stays the same, and that's because the world is always changing, and we have to have something that grounds us and gives us a foundation and allows us to make sense of the changing world. And without orthodoxy, I don't believe you can do that.
Yeah, it's very different. I definitely know that I don't know where I would even look, to be honest, because everywhere I
Yeah.
have looked just hasn't given me the best resources and answers.
Uh-huh.
Um,
I'm
cool.
just going to open
So,
my window real quick. Sorry.
okay,
I'm
no
listening. I'm
worries.
just going to open
You're
my
good.
window.
Okay.
All right, all set. Sorry.
Nope,
I'm
you're good.
upstairs. It gets warm up here.
I know. I actually had to like close off everything in here because it's very sunny, like too sunny in here, but it's super windy outside, so I couldn't be anywhere else
We're
without the
getting some
wind
snow right
howling.
now. It's nice.
Are you? We
Yeah,
haven't had like any snow. Like
I
Colorado's
saw.
like, yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know
the
where
jet
winter is,
streams are
but
moving.
it hasn't showed up here yet.
Yeah, the
Okay,
jet
so
streams are moving.
yeah.
Hmm.
We had kind of touched base last time we had just chatted. and I think that this is a good thing to kind of add in at this point. Can you give us some and like clarity on the government's original function and the difference between like how it was intended and then also like what we see now is with it being exploited to more of the beast empires, to give us just like a ground level for what we can what government's function should have been, or like what is its original function.
Yeah, I mean the idea originally was that power power had to be invested in something. It had to be somewhere in order to have an effect on the world. And so there's been throughout history different approaches in how how power gets its legitimacy. And the American version was originally the idea that power could be given to authority by the population that was being ruled. And so it was kind of a departure from the monarchical way of looking at power where the king himself gets his legitimacy directly from God. And so it's a variation of a theme. And originally, I think it was a good idea, but that's generally the idea. I'd say that's probably the most simple way of putting it is this idea that power needs to be somewhere in order to act on the world. And the idea was that the people of the population could, vote to give their power to people instead of just having a king, which is getting his direct power from God.
So we had talked a little bit too about, hold on, I think I need to turn this thing around so that it doesn't fall over on me,
Hmm.
because that would not be good. Okay, Jack's going to grab some. All right, close the door. Okay. Um, so US history, you hear so many different things. You hear like, oh, it was founded by the founding fathers were Christian, the founding fathers were, Freemasons. This is what they wanted. I've read some books on it. And it's interesting to know that like from what I understand, the religious beliefs of the founding fathers, well, I mean, there was multiple right within them, but many of them
Yeah.
had beliefs that aren't even really like popularized right now. So they had a different mindset and a different belief system than what we even like understand currently.
Hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, j just like anything in history, what's normally presented as, something very simple and as though it's nice and tidy and buttoned up is usually is in reality something a lot more nuanced and complicated. So the founding fathers had a range of beliefs. The majority of them were certainly Christian in some sense or God believing in some sense. And they did, the moral and ethical principles that they wanted to create the country on were certainly derived from Christian morals and ethics,
Mhm.
but they were not necessarily all Christian, though. A lot of them were deist, where they have a vague belief in God, not necessarily the Christian God. Thomas Jefferson, very specifically, was a pretty extreme deist, and they were also influenced. The revolutionaries were influenced directly by the revolutionaries in France, and they were explicitly atheist. They really hated God and they hated the monarchies as well.
Interesting. Kind of just a little like point on that. Um, the word Christian can be interpreted in so many different ways. I struggled with that at first whenever I first came back to the faith. I was like, I'm not like that kind of Christian, but there
Yeah,
was
yeah,
no other way. Like I appreciate being able to say like, practicing an Orthodox Christian, but what I kind of concluded was that, well, if the real Christians don't call themselves Christians, then we're kind of just like giving that all away. You know what I mean? Like it should be the
yeah.
opposite, to where people like that actually are rooted in the faith. They should be the ones to be able to identify so that the world knows this is actually like what Christ loving people what we represent. So I don't know if
Yeah.
if you felt that way, if you're like, is there another word that I could use to say I'm different than kind of, because it's
Yeah, yeah.
crazy. And it's getting even crazier, especially with like Christian nationalism, like the things that people are allowing themselves to believe right now and
Mm,
justify it. And it's so like upside down. They absolutely are glorifying like the government and political sides above what, Jesus Christ is like, what we're commanded to do through from him. So you want to
sure.
touch on that a little bit?
Well, I think that nationalism as an ideology is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, just like anything, it depends on the context that it comes from. But I mean, I would even argue in terms of philosophy, like some level of nationalism for a population is probably necessary in order for it to be healthy. The, you know, and again, that's context dependent, so it's very important, the way in which that comes about. But I think that this is a good example of the duality in the world and how it can be reconciled by proper theology. Because on the one hand, you have the right, and then on the other hand, you have the left. In some sense, that ends up being represented as nationalism and socialism to some degree, and those can take different, characteristics and qualities depending on where they are. But the reality is that it's a combination of ideas on both of those ends that makes for a good system. And this approach, this idea that we're going to have what works from both sides instead of having to pick a side. That function is fundamental to Orthodox theology and just the way that Orthodox see the world in general.
Yeah, I had heard once that, socialism works very well whenever like that's how a family should operate. Like absolutely
Hmm.
we should be able to function but whenever we have so many people and it's so big and not everybody agrees, then it's not really like moral, I guess, to put everybody under a blanket if they don't even agree with the expectations of that. But easier done with smaller communities, I think for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of socialism is just, well, I mean, we don't have to get all into that, but generally speaking, the idea that we should have compassion for people who don't have as much, and like any, convincing system of ideas, it has a goodness to it that's very obvious on the surface. So there are some aspects of it that are important and necessary for sure.
Yeah, well, and I've realized how like really screwed up we are because of the context of what has been like fed to us, especially over the last, 5, 10 years.
Hmm.
What comes to mind is I had this like, online conversation with a friend of mine about the word poverty. And whenever I'm reading about the saints and I'm learning, poverty is a virtue, right? Like being able to live below your means, being able to give to others beyond what your needs are. But at some point, it can also be weaponized and it can be exploited to
Yeah,
oppress people and then put them in a weakened state. And then on the extreme of that is to also kind of sell them back the solution. You can think about the native tribes in America, sell them their solution to their illness of poverty, which is actually weakening them and taking them away from their own
yeah.
culture and identity. So it's like, it's so complex. So it's like, I don't even think that we are aware of how much we're influenced by what we're told to think, especially like in America and now with the internet and everything. Yeah, you can't even like for me to say, like poverty is not the worst thing that could happen to you, or like people have
Hmm.
lived without running water and they've been fine. Like
Yeah,
God
yeah.
forbid you say something like that. That's like the worst thing that you
Hmm.
can see, but it's very detached from reality. Because I mean, that's where we all came from, and we were all able to survive and we're all able to work together. But
Yeah.
it's been weaponized. And then it's also really confusing too, because we have people that are like the government tells you that you're living in poverty based on how much money you make compared to the rest of the country, not necessarily how you actually live. There's people that are frugal
Sure.
that can live like happily and live well on little. Maybe they're more resourceful, maybe they have the skills. So yeah, you have that where like the government is pushing that on you, but then also the government uses that as like they're exploiting that so that they can do what their will is. And then they're saying, so like the farm bill, putting food stamps into any bill, that's kind of like throwing a bone to the people to make the people think that they have their back when really they're just like using that to exploit you so that they can do other things that ultimately harm you, and come
Yeah,
back.
for
So,
sure.
and that's one of the biggest things too. And right now, this is interesting, like the conversation that I'm hearing, like with the government. And I would like love to hear your perspective on this. So we come from like the government. Let me preface it this way. Like my opinion was that the government is extremely untrustworthy, at least right now, to actually make good choices for you. So
Hmm.
although that might be true, that is like kind of like the watered down version of probably what's happening. And then you have the other side. So let's say that people that are spending a lot of their time and energy like protesting and like being very
Yeah.
outspoken about things. So you have them say, well, that's a cop out for you to say that. You need to get involved, and we can't allow them to do the things that they're doing. So I saw somebody post something saying how Christians were the worst at like holding governments accountable. Like they cop out more than anybody.
Hmm.
Um, and so like I'm just seeing this pattern to where it's like it seems like nobody really wins. Yeah, I'm curious your thoughts as like to that whole thing and how you view that.
Well, I think Christians in the West, especially, have been, for the most part, they've been subject to a lot of deception and misinformation. And a lot of that happens it's not necessarily intentional that some pastor is sitting somewhere and is like, oh, I'm going to manipulate my congregation into, worshiping Israel. But at the end of the day, a lot of the ideas that spread throughout the Western version of Christianity were not necessarily true. And they tend to set people up to have an incorrect approach, especially to politics and especially when it comes to their understanding of power.
Yeah. Well,
That's a real thing for sure.
and it's hard too. Like, I mean, I have a hard time even understanding it too because I know, like, functionally, I know how like I'm supposed to show up in the world,
Hmm.
but uh, if you have these like empires, like their job isn't necessarily like to expand the kingdom of heaven here on earth. They kind of
Yeah,
have like
yeah,
the opposite role. However, I think that it is important to always remember that everything is through the will of God. So like even if certain things are allowed, he's also using that, like even all of this is a story that's coming to a head, and we have to have,
yeah.
the bad people in the story too, the bad people in the Bible, the pharaohs doing the things, so that God's will can be played out as well. But
Hmm.
yeah, we were talking about I had made the statement like where does this idea come from that a lot of Christians might believe right now that government should, could, or would be a Christian establishment? Like why do they even think, why are they even like, as far as I know, like biblically, like that's not really the story. The story is that however big what anything gets, whether it starts, like a small Christian organization, maybe the bigger that it gets, it turns into an empire, and at that point, it operates like in a different realm, and that it
Yeah,
serves a different purpose.
yeah. Well, there's a very rich precedent for governments being associated with Christianity because pretty much all of Europe, especially under the Pax Romana, which was kind of this world peace under the Roman Empire. So my point just to say is that it's not abnormal for government and authority to be associated with Christian faith because if your population has a Christian worldview, it's very easy for them to conclude that God is ruling in heaven and establishes his rule through the people that rule on earth. So it draws a direct line of vertical integration and authority. So that's been the case for a lot of the time.
So how do we handle like what we see now to where clearly, and God forbid, a lot of people in government are even using the Lord's name in vain by what they're trying to do and taking advantage of it kind of makes me sick just watching it. But so how are we supposed to handle that?
It depends on what you mean by handle it. The reality is that people who claim to be Christian and don't operate out of a Christian frame are going to necessarily make Christians look bad if they do the incorrect thing. So, for starters, I think you have to recognize that the Christian label is pretty vague and wide ranging in the West. So, because the churches have no real boundaries, there's not really been any limit to the types of ideas that can be included under the Christian umbrella. And so
What
you
is
end up with people in power that claim to be Christian that don't, they're not actually
yeah,
Christian.
yeah. What have you found for you personally in your life to be like the best approach for how we live in this world to where we are not validating evil, but we also are operating within this fallen world that it is attached to everything. We don't want to only keep it so small. I mean, maybe so. Maybe we're just like, nope, this is my path. I'm going to focus on me and make sure that like I'm doing what I need to be doing. But you clearly like you care about outreach in whatever form, like talking about things, being open about things. So what
Yeah.
has been like your conclusion on like the best way for you to handle how to deal with all the deception and everything that's happening and still have like valuable input?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think that you have to boycott as much as you can. Um, and there's all different ways you can do that, but obviously people can work that out on their own. But ultimately, we're living in an evil world, and in some sense, by virtue of being alive, until we become a saint, you're going to be contributing to the evil. It's present in all of us until we're transformed by Christ. So it's you're gonna be participating in some sense, but the degree to which you participate, you have some control over. So I think for me, the comfort zone is just being conscious of where I put my energy, what I consume, where I spend my money, especially. People need to exit this idea that voting is kind of how they exercise their power and recognize that where they spend their money is a lot more powerful than, who they vote for.
Amen to that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's huge.
Hmm.
I mean, there's a reason why we call currency. It's not just money. It's
That's
energy, it's
right.
influence. There's a lot to it. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good kind of segue into talking about some of the influence of technology and what's been referred to as technocrats. And I know that we've talked about this
Hmm.
before. I think that there's a lot of just like people that don't understand who some main players are, maybe not some vocabulary words. I know that I had to figure out what technocrats mean and even still the best of my understanding is just when the government is ruled by unelected people in industry or some other type of influence. I don't know if that's a good explanation of that, but if you want to get into a little bit of that to give us an idea of where we're at currently.
Yeah, sure. So technocracy is the idea that power should be exercised by elites, is basically what it is, and specifically by people who control technology. So it's a pretty naked power grab on behalf of scientists and engineers to say that because they have data and science that they should be the ones who rule. And that's what technocracy is. So you can imagine there's a lot of people who fit into that category. Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Alex Karp, these people at Palantir, Mark Andreessen, all of these people who are in the fintech industry and especially the tech industry. The names and players in that are they, for the most part, are technocrats. They see themselves as that type of movement.
So it's like they identify themselves as like we are like important, powerful people, and we like maybe everybody else is like stupid, and we should be the ones to like rule
Basically,
them
yeah,
pretty much.
yeah, that's right.